Hey there everyone, I'm Captain Klutz. You may know me from my height map and terrain generator work for Minecraft and OpenTTD. Here you can see one of my examples in the background, and today I'm going to be showing you through the latest version of my template for World Machine, which is under the codename Adriatica because it's A for the first full release of this template. So I use it to make terrain such as this. I use it to make this volcano. I use it to make these sort of volcanic islands, and most recently I use it to create an extension for my server that I run for my friends. This one's called the Seven Sisters, and if you can see custom structures on there as well. So I wanted to also go through how to do that. In terms of software you will need the World Machine Free Community Edition or the full edition if you haven't already. The Free Community Edition can export worlds up to 1025 pixels square, which can then be upsized to 1.5 kilometers or 1,500 blocks square in Minecraft, or about 2,000 blocks if you don't mind losing a little detail. But it's not a time-restricted trial. It's a great piece of software, and if you're creating small worlds, it is more than enough for the free version. The other program you will need is World Painter. So this is also free software. It allows you to sculpt landscapes in a visual editor. If you haven't used it yet, I'll be going through the basics of that later. And then, of course, you'll need my template, which you can get from GitHub. So I will be linking all of these in the description. So you want to click on the Adriatica template, which is the most recent version. And then you will want to download the raw file by clicking raw and then save link as. And then you'll want to download that. I'll put that on my desktop. So you don't click on the raw button, you right click it and you click save link as, and you save it as, it should come up as a .tmd, which is the file format for World Machine. So if we head to the desktop, pardon me, we can see that I've downloaded it here. When you open it in World Machine, it's a little bit overwhelming. So if this is your first time using World Machine, let me go over the basics. So every item in World Machine, or every node, has optional inputs and outputs and required inputs and outputs. So each node represents one device. So for example, this one is an advanced Perlin noise node. This one changes the curves. So if you press the 3D view and you press this A/B button, you can compare the before and after. And then what World Machine is most famous for is its erosion and flow suites, its water suites, and this is why it is such a persistent program, and it's very well used and well loved. It's very flexible and creates pretty good outputs even for beginners. And then so you can go through step by step. This is the default world, and you can see how that comes up. And then importantly, you have the height output, so you can export it as, for example, a PNG if you want to import it into World Painter. So when you open my template, it's very overwhelming. So let me go through it bit by bit. Firstly, the most important bit is that it is licensed under CC by NC, which means if you want to use it commercially, please contact me and I will approve it so you can use it commercially. But even if you don't contact me, you can still share it and adapt it as long as you do not use it for commercial use. So you can use it on your personal server, for example. So here's a little overview of the current version, which is Adriatica. We'll be going through all of these different inputs. So the most important input are the shapes nodes. So you'll see there's one for plateaus, one for mountains, one for hills and lowlands, sea level fixing, glaciation, dunes, and terracing. So these are the most important. The rest of these are just for changing parameters once you get into more advanced use, but the template works out of the box. So if we start with plateaus, by double clicking the shapes editor, you can open it in here. Let's check first of all the project settings. So we're going to be exporting it as 1000 by 1000. And I'm using a width. So this is used for scaling the world. So in this case, I'm using 8 kilometers per 1000 pixels. So I've opened the plateaus generator. And here you can draw plateaus. I recommend putting a small fall off between 100 and 500 meters. And that will get you plateaus shapes looking like this. The way it works is so you press F to focus on different nodes. There's it cuts small ridges, and then there's a small amount of displacement at the edges to roughen the edges, and then finally there's a cut into the plateau to create the sort of thermal weathering effect, and then it goes into a strata editor to create these sort of rocky outcroppings, and that is the plateau generator. Let's look at mountains next. So actually, let me move this plateau to the side, just like that. Let's look at mountains next. So for mountains, I recommend, by default, the curve is smooth. I recommend changing it to linear. I recommend a fall-off distance of about 1.5 kilometers at this 8 kilometer scale. And you should try and make sure that this top circle is as small as possible. And that will give you good mountain peaks. So if we look at that, it's nice and steep at the top, a bit cartoonish, but I find that that works well in Minecraft with limited render distance. So that's a mountain shapes editor. So the way the mountains works is first it takes the cone that you draw, then it expands it based on noise to create lumpy outcroppings, and then there's a very important stage at which water is created, and that is used to carve these sort of ridges into the mountain. And based on that, it outputs quite a stark shape, but once it goes through the rest of the template, it ends up coming out looking actually quite nice. So those are mountains, hills, and lowlands. So these are quite blobby. So if you want hills to be at sea level, I recommend drawing them at about 650 meters, or about 620 meters. And that will give you hills at sea level. So this is your bog standard flat Minecraft plains. You can draw little billowy hills as part of this. I recommend putting those at about 700 to 900 meters and making them smaller. So here you can see these become smaller hills, and what you do is you press the copy button. Let me actually just reduce the shape break up a little bit, and then you can draw multiple circles to create some nice blobby little hills. There you go. So that's the hills and lowlands editor. If you use the tall version of the hills, so if you make them very, very tall, then they sort of look in between the mountains and the plateaus. They're not as flat as the plateaus, but they're not as steep as the mountains. Next, we have the sea level fixer. So this is designed so if you draw a path, for example, it will try and carve the terrain down to sea level where you drew the path. So you can see how it affects the plateau here, you can see how it affects the mountains, you can see how it affects the hills. It's good for creating bays and inlets. Next, we have glaciation. So as opposed to the one I just showed you, the sea level fixer, glaciation does not put things into the sea. It instead just moves them down to around sea level. So you can see the effect on the mountain here. If we put it here, you can see one side of the mountain is very smooth, and the other side has been put down to around sea level. So this is what glaciation does. It tries to preserve the shape as much as possible, but yes, it does basically result in everything being quite flat and at sea level. So that's the glaciation editor. Dunes. So dunes you draw, I recommend a polygon, set it to maximum, and it will create dune noise wherever you want it. Dunes is quite useful. And then forced terracing. If you create an area where you want to force terracing, it will basically try and turn that area into a series of cliffs. So you can see here, this area in the middle, the cliffs have sort of been forced by the terracing shapes editor. You can see that they're much more cliffy than the rest of the map. So those are the inputs. Another important thing is you're able to re-roll the random numbers. You can either do that by holding shift and clicking the dice button, and that re-rolls all the random numbers, or if you go to an individual noise, you can press it, while in the workflow view, and you can re-roll just that one noise generator. So I recommend re-rolling until you find a combination that's perfect for what you draw. But apart from that, it's pretty paint by numbers, and you can see how that turns out. So let's try and draw something, shall we? So let's try and draw something similar to this map. So you can see there's a ridge of plateaus in the middle, there's hills around the outside, and then there's mountains in the middle. So let's delete everything and do that. So finally get rid of the dunes and get rid of the terracing. So let's start with our hills at 620 meters. That'll act as our base. And maybe we can already draw some smaller hills up in this corner. What's useful to do is you can lock this from changes. Let's draw a path in the middle here for our hills. So let's see, we want it to be about this big. And what's useful is you can right click each individual cross and set the value for that area. So here you can actually do it quite visually, and you can see that it generates the hills in the middle there. And then we can draw some more little hills over here, just as an example. There we go. And I already want to draw a little area for the river, so I'm going to do that here. I'm going to make sure it's at maximum. I'm going to make the fall off distance a bit longer. And so this is going to be at maximum, and then this is going to be close to 0. So later when we put that into Minecraft, it'll be an area for our sea. I actually probably should make it stronger. So if you give me a second, you can see I can make it stronger here by changing this multiply variable. I'll make it a little bit stronger. Let's see what that looks like again. There we go. There's our little inlet. Now we want to draw the mountains. So if you remember, we want to draw small circles ideally. Max height, fall off about 1.5 to 2 kilometers. And we want to minimize this circle, copy the setting. Let's draw 3 mountains. 1, 2, 3. Make these nice and small. Perfect. And how about we also draw some plateau noise? So what I like doing with plateaus is I like accentuating the fall off of the mountain. So I'll put the fall off at about 200 meters. I'll put the height value at about just under 1 kilometer, maybe a bit more in this case. So let's do one at say 1.3 kilometers. And then let's do a second larger fall off at about 900 meters. So this is just illustrative, by the way. The heights, they're just illustrative. They're internal. You can change the scaling in the project setup to use different scaling. Anyway, let's go back to our plateaus. So let's draw some of those, some nice sharp shapes to make some cliffs, some interesting areas to explore. And then let's take the lower ones, smooth it out a bit, make sure the transition is nice. So World Machine will build previews based off your CPU power. So here you can see the preview, what I've drawn, and maybe we'll make this area at the bottom a big beach. So I will take my dunes and I will draw them here, make sure that they're maximum. There we go. Just some dunes along the bottom to suggest a beach or a desert in the bottom half of the map. And we've pretty much used every type of device here. Maybe I will just use glaciation here to demonstrate how flat that can make an area. See, you can see this area here at the bottom of the cliffs, fully glaciated, very nice and flat. So we've got the hills, we've got the plateaus, we've got the mountains. And once you are done, all you have to do is give it a name. So I'll just give this the name test1, put it on my desktop, click save, and then you need to press the write to disk button. So if it hasn't finished building already, it will build that at full resolution for you. So once you've written it to disk, you want to open World Painter, go into Import New World from Height Map, and you want to navigate to where you saved it, and it'll show you a preview. So as you can see, the height scalings are very wrong, and that's because you need to look at these low and high mappings. So this means the darkest pixel on the map is at 15,000. So we want to reflect that. The brightest pixel of the map is at 62K. So let's make our mountains nice and tall. Let's make our mountains reach up to about the high 270s. And we want to increase our ocean floor. So this should probably be around 60 because our lowest, the lowest part of the map is barely at sea level. So let's take a look. It takes a bit of trial and error, but there you go. You can see that that has filled it up like it did in the previews. So you can just do a cross comparison, check that you're happy with it. And I advise just using a single applying grass everywhere just to start with. Here you also want to check the offsets. So by default, top left corner is 0, 0. I'll just keep that as the case. And so we click OK to import it. And what's important to do, one of the commands is Control-3, and that gives you a 3D preview. So you can look at that to sort of get a fairly blocky overview of what you'll get when you export. So now for some basics, I want to create a custom terrain layer. It's called a custom material. I'll call this one gravel and grass. So I use blobs at a scale of about 60, and it's important to choose grass block, not grass the object, because grass the object is just tall grass. So I choose grass and then gravel, and then you can see that creates some nice noise. In this case, I might make the grass more prevalent than the gravel. Yeah, that looks good. And then the second one I like to do, let's call it 2 stone and grass. So let's add grass blocks, let's add stone, and let's add gravel. There we go. And let us change this a little bit. Change this to 60 again. I find if you don't make this small enough, it looks too much like a camouflage pattern. And then what we're going to do is we're going to press Control-G. These are for global operations. So we're going to fill the map with sand at or below a height of, let's say, 64. So you can see that puts sand on the map. We're going to tidy this up later. And then we're going to put gravel and grass at or above 65, where it's above about 30 degrees. And then we're going to put stone and grass above, let's say, 45 degrees. Then we're going to put stone above, let's say, 60 degrees. And then, for example, we can put rock, which is a mixture of stone and cobblestone, above 70 degrees. And then we can put deep slate above 80 degrees slopes. I don't know why that filled that area with deep slate when that is not very slopey. But anyway, let's just paint that with sand again. Maybe that was something I overlooked. At or below 65. There we go. All right, so now we've got our bulk painting done. Now you'll go in and want to paint by hand. So I like to choose bare grass for my grassy areas, because I like to use Minecraft to populate the map. And here it's important to make sure you select, sorry, 1 second, only on what you want to replace. So here I'm just going to replace the sand with grass. So I like to use Minecraft to populate my maps. What does that mean? It means that you just have to paint the biomes. You don't paint the trees, you don't paint the ores, you don't paint flowers and stuff. You just leave that all to Minecraft. And I will show you how to do that in a second. So there we go, we've painted the grass. Now we want to paint our sand. We want to make sure it's only on this bare grass. Actually, we wanted to overwrite the stone here, so let's go ahead and just... This is just for illustration, so it's not going to be very pretty. I'm sure if you took more time, you could do this, but this is just, you know, quick demonstration. There we go. You can see that's going to be our desert dunes area. So, population. So what you need to do is, first of all, make all automatic biomes permanent. So that will make the biomes permanent. So then I want to put, for example, beach only on sand here. So I'll make this all beach. And then I'll make this all desert. And now, except on sand, I'll probably want to make this all forest. And then I'll want to intersperse some birch forest as noise, so I recommend downloading my brush pack, which I will also link. So, some birch forest for variety. And then I want to fill with the biome. Let's use the meadow biome at or above 110 to remove the trees above a certain level, and then above 140 we'll use the plains biome to change the color of the grass, and then above 160 we will use stony peaks to change the color of the grass again. So you can see this is our biome layout map. So now we are almost ready to export. So we want to check our export settings. We want generate structures to be turned on, even though the world painted default generate structures doesn't really work, but I'll show you a way to get around that in just a second. We want caves everywhere, caverns everywhere, chasms everywhere. We want lush caves and dripstone caves. And then Minecraft will handle resources. So we want to click allow Minecraft to populate the entire terrain. And then we want to press the export button. And now we wait. Depending on your computer, this will take a different amount of time. Okay, so once this is done exporting, then what we do is, well, let me make sure to save this first of all. And then we'll open up our Minecraft. We'll navigate to the new world. We called it test 1. Let's take a look and let's see how the export did. Oh, looks like we spawned in the middle of the map on one of the mountains. You can see that Minecraft has generated the ore despite the terrain being custom. So what populate does is basically Minecraft takes the terrain you give it as its own, and it adds the trees, flowers, it adds the ores, but what it does not add are caves. So the caves are here. Were made by World Painter. So let's take a look at our map, and we can take a look at the scale. We can see how it looks, and we can see if the heights are what we want, if the heights of the cliffs are ideal. We can take a look at our dunes. We can see if we made them big enough. So in the future we might exclude this area from lush caves, for example, but we can see the dune noise worked pretty well. It generated pretty medium-sized dunes, which is what we wanted. So you can see here where we painted the lower level of the plateaus. You can see here the higher level of the plateaus. You can see how we use the bulk replace with the meadow to make sure that the trees don't generate on the top of plateaus. And you can see right at the top that the grass color changes because we made it, first of all, plains, and then we made it stony peaks. So you may have seen that in my example pictures, that there are structures. So what I recommend is downloading a mod such as Explorify, or you can just use the vanilla structures. And before using this, I recommend backing up your world because there is no undo feature. But what I recommend using is the /place function. So if you've never used this before, you can place individual features, you can place structures. So for example, you could place an individual, for example, amethyst geode. You could place a piece of a jigsaw, for example, from a village. You could place a template, or in my case, I'm going to be placing structures from different mods. So for example, here I've downloaded Explorify and Dungeons Arise. So let's try placing an explorify guidepost warm. So you do /place structure explorify guidepost warm. Let's see if that did anything. Oh, it did. And you can see it placed it a little bit above the ground. So this is the risk of running this command. It does it based off the seed of the world and not off the terrain. Let's try something else. Let's try placing village. Might take a while. And then as you can see, Minecraft thinks the terrain is up here, but it is not, unfortunately. So you can see that this village failed, for example, but perhaps if we were to place it somewhere else, it would succeed. And this is why it's important to create a backup of the world. You can see here it did a little bit better, but some of the houses might have accidentally generated underground. So it's not great for placing villages, but what it is good for placing is underground structures. So by default, trial chambers do not get placed. So it's very, very useful to use the place command to place trial chambers, for example. Generally, it exceeds at placing things underground. So you can see here it successfully placed this trial chamber, or alternatively floating things, such as, I believe it's called the... What is it? It's a small blimp, for example, from where dungeons arise, and you can see it placed that small blimp just fine in the world there. But for other things, you might have to use, for example, a world editor like Axiom to place things into the world where there's a mismatch between the seed and the terrain. Let's try one more thing. Let's try placing a monastery. See what happens. You can see that place is quite a way above ground, and then, for example, if you were to run the command up here, it might place it below the ground instead. That's one of the disadvantages of this method. You can see that here I got quite lucky with my giant mushroom and my monastery placement. In this case, it's about finding a seed that matches sort of the map and its locations. But in terms of creating drafts of worlds, it's very useful. And then you can, for example, you can go into a void world or a super flat world. You can generate the monastery. You can copy it as a schematic, and then you can place it wherever you want on your finished map. Oh, sorry about that. But anyway, the schematics aren't the main focus. The main focus is, in fact, the terrain. And as you can see here, the template has done an excellent job. In just about half an hour, we have made some very, very passable terrain. And it's also, importantly, very playable. You have flat areas, you have steep areas, you have very aesthetic areas, and you have resources underground. You have dungeons, you have geodes. You can see here, here's a geode. You have lush caves and driftstone caves, and all within half an hour. And then you can spend the time you saved making the terrain, for example, copying and pasting villages or other schematics into the world. Oh, I should say, yeah, it's mostly the underground ones that work very well. So, for example, if I was to place a stronghold, it would work very well. So it just placed a stronghold somewhere. Here it is. You can see that that placed just fine. Or if I was to place a mine shaft, you can see that is also fine. It's just the overground structures that have a little bit of a problem. To circumvent this, you can use custom objects in World Painter, but that's probably complex enough to be its own tutorial. And as far as getting those custom structures, I would recommend looking in the World Painter Discord, which I will link in the description of this video, along with everything I used to make this terrain. Okay, I hope that was useful. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough. I hope you enjoy my free template, and if you have any suggestions, you can reach out to me. I put my contacts in the license and in the README on GitHub, so you can get into contact with me if you have any ideas on how to improve the template, for example. But apart from that, I believe that's all I wanted to cover. I hope you have fun using this to create great Minecraft maps, and I will see you at another time.